History remembers the great werewolf kings by the wars they won and the empires they conquered. But the chronicles of the High Ridge Kingdom try to erase the night King Caspian arrived at the Blackwood estate. They want you to believe he chose his queen from a line of pure-blooded, fierce warrior women. The truth is far more scandalous. In the damp, rat-infested cellars beneath the grand dining hall, the Blackwood pack hid their greatest shame: a blind, frail Omega daughter. She was meant to be a ghost, a secret buried in the dark. But they forgot one simple, undeniable rule of nature. An alpha king can always recognize the scent of his destined mate, even through 10 feet of solid stone. The Blackwood estate was a fortress of dark stone and iron, nestled deep within the treacherous valleys of the northern reaches. To the rest of the medieval werewolf kingdoms, Lord Godfrey Blackwood was a paragon of strength, a ruthless alpha who had bred a formidable pack of warriors. But behind the heavy oak doors and tapestries of his keep, Godfrey harbored a secret that gnawed at his pride every single day. Her name was Isolde. Born the second daughter to Godfrey's late first wife, Isolde was everything a medieval werewolf was not supposed to be. She was an Omega, a rarity in itself, usually revered for their calming scents and fertility. But Isolde was born with eyes the color of clouded glass. She was entirely blind. In the brutal, unforgiving era of the 12th century, a blind wolf was considered a curse from the moon goddess, a genetic failing that weakened the pack's bloodline. Godfrey, terrified of losing his political standing among the rival lords, declared the child stillborn to the outside world. For 19 years, Isolde existed only as a phantom in the lowest levels of the keep. Her world was defined not by light and shadow, but by the cold, damp stone under her bare feet, the scurrying of mice in the grain silos, and the harsh, biting draught that swept through the iron grates. Her stepmother, Lady Beatrice, and her older, cruel-hearted alpha sister Rowena ensured Isolde's life was one of servitude and isolation. She wore burlap sacks, tailored into crude dresses. Her hands, though delicate, were calloused from scrubbing the enormous iron cauldrons used to feed the castle guards. "You missed a spot of grease on the rim, you useless creature," a harsh voice echoed in the cavernous kitchens. It was Bastian, the head cook and abater, who took immense pleasure in enforcing Lord Godfrey's cruelty. Isolde didn't flinch. Her heightened senses had heard his heavy, uneven footsteps approaching long before he spoke. She could smell the stale ale on his breath and the sharp tang of raw onions on his tunic. "I apologize, Bastian," Isolde murmured, her voice soft, melodic, and entirely devoid of the aggressive growls common to her kind. She reached out, her fingertips lightly grazing the cold iron of the cauldron until she found the slick spot of grease. With a ragged cloth, she began to scrub again. "See that you finish before the sun sets," Bastian spat, kicking her wooden bucket so the dirty water sloshed over her bare toes. "The king arrives tonight. If Lord Godfrey finds out you've wandered past the lower arches while the royal entourage is here, he won't just whip you. He'll throw you to the hounds." The king. Isolde's heart gave a slight, involuntary flutter. Even in the depths of the cellars, she had heard the whispers of the kitchen maids. King Caspian of the High Ridge Kingdom was embarking on his royal tour. He was a conqueror, an alpha among alphas, whose sheer presence was said to force ordinary wolves to their knees. He was 28, unmarried, and without a Luna. The entire Blackwood keep had been in a state of frenzied panic for weeks. Rowena, celebrated for her striking beauty and fierce combat skills, was being groomed to catch the king's eye. Isolde knew she would never see the king. She couldn't see anything. But as the hours ticked by and the heavy thud of carriage wheels echoed through the courtyard above, she felt a strange, inexplicable pull in her chest. A restless energy settled deep within her bones, making the hair on her arms stand on end. She dismissed it as anxiety. The keep was crowded, the air thick with unfamiliar scents and the aggressive pheromones of visiting warriors. Upstairs, the world was bathed in candlelight and dripping with jewels. Down below, Isolde huddled in the corner of the root cellar, clutching a thin, moth-eaten blanket around her shoulders, waiting for the storm of the royal visit to pass. The great hall of Blackwood Keep was a spectacle of medieval decadence. Massive hearths roared with blazing pine logs, casting dancing shadows over the banners of black and silver. Long wooden tables groaned beneath the weight of roasted boars, spiced pheasants, and rivers of dark red wine. At the head table sat King Caspian. He was a terrifyingly handsome man, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, with piercing amber eyes that seemed to strip away the pleasantries of everyone he looked upon. He wore a tunic of midnight blue velvet, lined with the pelts of dire wolves he had slain himself. Beside him, Lord Godfrey was sweating profusely, leaning in to offer eager, sycophantic praise, while Rowena sat to his left, draped in crimson silk, practically vibrating with the effort of projecting her most alluring, dominant scent. Caspian was bored. He had visited 5 territories in the past 2 months. He had met dozens of high-born daughters, all of them fierce, all of them beautiful, and all of them entirely unappealing to his inner wolf. His beast was ancient, demanding, and dormant. It did not want a political alliance, it wanted a mate. And as Rowena leaned over, intentionally brushing her bare shoulder against his arm, and filling his nose with her heavy, perfumed scent of dark musk and roses, Caspian's inner wolf merely let out a low rumble of profound irritation. "Your Majesty," Rowena purred, offering him a golden goblet of wine. "We have prepared a hunting tournament for tomorrow. It would be my honor to ride at your side." Caspian took the goblet, his expression unreadable. "I am sure you are a capable hunter, Lady Rowena. But I came to assess the strength of your borders, not to chase foxes." Lord Godfrey chuckled nervously, shooting a warning glance at his daughter. "Of course, my king. The Blackwood borders are impenetrable. We are your fiercest loyalists." Down below, the feast meant absolute chaos in the kitchens. The demand for fresh bread and wine was relentless. Isolde had been pushed into the servants' corridor, a narrow, dark hallway that ran directly behind the walls of the great hall, used by squires to transport wood to the hearths. Bastien had shoved a massive basket of chopped cedar into her arms. "Take this to the grating behind the main hearth," Bastien hissed, shoving her shoulder. "And do not make a sound. Slide the wood through the chute and come straight back." Isolde stumbled, the rough bark of the cedar scraping against her chin. The basket was impossibly heavy for her frail frame, but she swallowed her pain and navigated the pitch-black corridor. She didn't need light to find her way. She counted her steps. 1, 2, 3. Left at the damp patch of moss. 4, 5, 6. She reached the iron grating. Through the slots, the intense heat of the great hall's fire blasted her face. She could hear the booming voices of the lords, the clatter of silver plates, and the screeching of lutes. It was overwhelming. The sense of 100 different wolves crashed over her sensitive nose. But then, underneath the roasted meat, the heavy perfumes and the stale sweat, Isolde caught a scent that made her stop breathing entirely. It was sharp and clean, like the air right before a massive thunderstorm, mixed with the deep, earthy aroma of crushed pine needles and a faint metallic tang of blood. It was the most beautiful, intoxicating thing she had ever experienced. It wrapped around her senses, soothing the constant ache in her malnourished body. Without realizing it, Isolde dropped to her knees, leaning her face against the hot iron grate, desperately inhaling the scent. Her inner wolf, dormant and weak for 19 years, suddenly let out a frantic, pleading whimper in her mind. Mate. In the great hall, King Caspian froze. He was mid-sentence, about to dismiss another of Lord Godfrey's boasts, when it hit him. It cut through the suffocating perfume of Rowena and the heavy grease of the feast like a blade of pure light, rainwater, wild mountain jasmine, and the undeniable, sweet, submissive undertone of an omega. But it wasn't just any omega scent. It was a lock fitting into a key. It was a cosmic tether snapping taut around his very soul. The goblet in Caspian's hand shattered. The heavy gold bent under the sudden, monstrous grip of his hand, and dark wine spilled across the white linen tablecloth like blood. The great hall went deathly silent. The music stopped abruptly. Every alpha, beta, and omega in the room lowered their heads, instinctively submitting to the terrifying spike of dominant, possessive alpha energy that exploded from the king. His amber eyes flared to a glowing, unnatural gold. His chest heaved. Your Majesty," Lord Godfrey stammered, pale as a ghost, pushing his chair back. "Is the wine poisoned?" Caspian didn't look at him. He stood up, towering over the table. His gaze locked onto the massive stone fireplace at the far end of the hall. His beast was clawing at the inside of his ribs, roaring a single deafening command. "Mine." "Who is back there?" Caspian's voice was no longer human. It was a dual-toned, guttural snarl that rattled the silver platters on the tables. Rowena looked at the fireplace in confusion. "No one, my king. Only the servant tunnels. They are filled with the low-born stuff." "You are lying," Caspian growled, stepping away from the table. He didn't walk. He stalked. He moved with the predatory grace of a lethal predator tracking its prey. The crowd parted frantically, terrified of the lethal intent radiating from the king. Behind the grate, Isolde heard the booming, terrifying voice. She felt the heavy, suffocating wave of power washing through the iron slots. Panic seized her. She scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the rough stone floor. She had to leave. She was forbidden to be near the grating. If Godfrey caught her, she would be killed. In her haste, her foot caught the edge of the heavy cedar basket. It tipped over with a loud, wooden crash. The sound of the spilling wood echoed loudly through the silent great hall. Before Lord Godfrey could even shout for his guards to investigate, King Caspian was moving. He bypassed the entrance to the servant corridors entirely. Driven by the primal madness of the mate bond, Caspian reached the massive stone wall beside the hearth, where a heavy, locked iron door led to the lower maintenance shafts. "Your Majesty, please, those are restricted tunnels, dirty and unfit for—" Lord Godfrey started, running after him. Caspian didn't use a key. He didn't wait for a guard. He gripped the heavy iron handle of the door, braced his boots against the stone, and ripped the door entirely off its iron hinges with a horrifying screech of tearing metal. He tossed the heavy door aside as if it were made of kindling. The lords and ladies of the court gasped in sheer terror at the display of monstrous strength. Caspian plunged into the darkness of the corridor. Isolde was scrambling blindly down the tunnel, her bare feet slipping on the damp stone. She was sobbing quietly, terrified of the heavy, thunderous footsteps echoing behind her. She hit a dead end, a wooden door leading to the cellars that Bastien had locked behind her. She clawed at the wood, her blind eyes wide with unseeing panic. "Please," she whispered into the dark. "Please open." Suddenly, the scent of a thunderstorm and pine surrounded her entirely. The heat radiating from the presence behind her was staggering. Isolde froze, pressing her back flush against the rough wooden door, trembling like a trapped rabbit. "Do not run from me," a deep, rumbling voice commanded softly. It wasn't angry. It was thick with emotion, reverence, and a desperate, possessive need. Isolde whimpered, tucking her chin to her chest, exposing her neck in ultimate submission. I beg your pardon, my lord. I am just a servant. I am going back to the cellars. Please do not tell the Alpha." Caspian stared at the creature before him. The darkness of the tunnel did not hinder his wolf's vision. He saw a tiny, fragile girl, dressed in a filthy, oversized burlap sack. She was shivering. Her face was smudged with soot and ash, but beneath the dirt, she possessed an ethereal, haunting beauty. Pale, flawless skin and long hair the color of spun moonlight that fell in tangled waves down her back. But it was her eyes that made his heart stop. Wide, beautiful, and the cloudy, milky color of a winter sky. She was blind, and she was starving. A furious, blinding rage erupted in Caspian's chest, not at her, but at the house that had kept his mate in such deplorable conditions. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You are no servant," Caspian whispered, his voice cracking with intensity. He reached out, his massive, scarred hand gently hovering over her cheek before he carefully cupped her face. His thumb brushed a streak of soot from her cheekbone. The moment his skin touched hers, a jolt of pure electricity shot through them both. Isolde gasped, her sightless eyes widening as a profound sense of warmth and absolute safety flooded her shattered soul. Before another word could be spoken, the corridor filled with torches. Lord Godfrey, Rowena, and a dozen armed guards crowded into the entrance of the narrow tunnel. "Your Majesty!" Godfrey cried out of breath. "Step away from that creature. She is sick, a wretched thing from the village. Guards, take her to the dungeons immediately for disturbing the king." 2 guards stepped forward, reaching for Isolde. Caspian moved faster than the eye could track. He spun around, placing Isolde firmly behind his massive back, shielding her entirely from the torches and the guards. His lips pulled back over his teeth, extending his upper canines in a terrifying, lethal snarl. The sound that ripped from his throat wasn't a growl. It was the roar of a monstrous alpha defending his mate. The 2 guards immediately collapsed to their knees, clutching their ears, physically driven to the stone floor by the sheer, crushing weight of the king's aura. "Touch her," Caspian warned, his voice echoing off the stone walls like the voice of a god of war. "And I will paint this corridor with your blood." Lord Godfrey recoiled, his face draining of all color. Rowena stared in absolute shock, holding her torch high, finally getting a good look at the girl trembling behind the king. "Isolde?" Rowena breathed, her voice a mix of disbelief and disgust. What are you doing out of the cellars?" "Father, it's Isolde." Caspian's golden eyes snapped to Lord Godfrey. The pieces fell into place. He looked at the rich velvet of the Alpha's tunic, then back at the burlap sack on his mate. "Who is she?" Caspian demanded, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that promised absolute ruin. Godfrey was shaking violently. She is a mistake, my king. A blight on our bloodline. She is my daughter, but she is blind. An omega. A useless, broken thing. We keep her hidden for the honor of the pack. She is nothing." Caspian felt his mate flinch against his back at her father's cruel words. He reached behind him, wrapping his large hand around Isolde's tiny, trembling one, interlacing their fingers. "You are a fool, Lord Godfrey," Caspian said, his voice ringing with a horrifying finality. He unclasped his heavy, fur-lined royal cloak from his shoulders and gently, reverently, wrapped it around Isolde's shivering shoulders. The thick velvet swallowed her small frame, enveloping her in his scent and his absolute protection. He then turned to the Lord of Blackwood Keep, his eyes blazing with the promise of a kingdom's wrath. "She is not a mistake," King Caspian declared, his voice carrying out of the tunnel and echoing into the great hall for every visiting lord and lady to hear. "She is Isolde, and as of this moment, she is the sole queen of the High Ridge Kingdom and my fated mate, and heaven help the man who ever calls her broken again." The silence in the servants' corridor was absolute, broken only by the ragged, terrified breaths of Lord Godfrey. The flickering torchlight cast long, monstrous shadows of King Caspian against the stone walls. In the king's arms, enveloped entirely in the midnight blue royal cloak, Isolde felt incredibly small. For 19 years she had been a ghost, a secret shame to be locked away. Now she was anchored against a chest that rumbled with the terrifying, protective fury of an alpha king. Lord Godfrey finally found his voice, though it trembled like a dying leaf. "Your Majesty, you cannot mean this. The mate bond is sacred, yes, but she is an invalid. She cannot rule. The High Council will never accept a blind Omega as the Queen of the High Ridge. Do you presume to tell me what my kingdom will accept, Godfrey?" Caspian's voice was dangerously soft. He turned, pulling Isolde gently against his side. The warmth of his body seeped into her freezing skin, soothing the chronic ache in her bones. Rowena, unable to contain her venomous jealousy, stepped forward, her silk gown rustling. "My king, be reasonable. Isolde has never been educated in the ways of the court. She cannot read, she cannot fight, she cannot even see the enemies that would plot against you. If you take her, you take a burden." Isolde shrank back, her sightless eyes dropping to the floor. Rowena was right. She was nothing but a scullery maid in the dark. The sudden, desperate urge to flee back into the safety of the cellars overwhelmed her, but Caspian's grip tightened, anchoring her to the spot. "A burden," Caspian echoed, his golden eyes locking onto Rowena with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "The only burden this kingdom suffers is the stench of your cruelty. You speak of enemies plotting against me, Lady Rowena, yet the greatest treachery I have witnessed tonight is a family starving their own blood in the dark." The king's words struck like a physical blow. The visiting lords and ladies, who had crowded near the archway to witness the commotion, began to murmur. The social facade of the noble Blackwood family was shattering in real time. The righteous karma of their hidden sins was finally dragging them into the light. Then, a tall, gaunt man with a ledger tucked under his arm stepped out from the crowd of nobles. It was Lord Harrison Sterling, the royal scribe and the keeper of the ancient laws. "Your Majesty," Lord Harrison began, his voice dry and clinical, "Lord Godfrey, despite his deplorable methods, speaks a fraction of truth. Under the Fitzgerald Accords of 1142, an unpresented wolf cannot be officially crowned queen without proving her worth to the pack. If she is physically impaired, the law states she must endure the trial of the ancestors to prove the moon goddess has not cursed her bloodline." Isolde felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard whispers of the trials from the older servants. They were brutal, archaic tests of survival, meant for hardened warriors, not frail Omegas. Lord Godfrey's eyes lit up with a wicked, desperate gleam. "Yes, the Fitzgerald Accords. If she fails the trial, the mate bond is legally nullified by the state, and you must choose another, a pure-blooded alpha." He gestured wildly to Rowena. Caspian did not flinch. He looked down at Isolde, his expression softening entirely as he brushed a tangled lock of silver hair from her face. He saw the sheer terror in her milky eyes. "Let them invoke their dusty laws," Caspian declared to the room, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. We will return to the High Ridge Kingdom. Isolde will take the trial of the ancestors, and when she passes, I will return to this keep, Lord Godfrey. Not as a guest, but as an executioner for the crimes you have committed against my queen." Without another word, Caspian swept Isolde into his arms, lifting her completely off the damp stone floor. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her thin arms around his broad neck. As the king carried her out of the lower depths and through the great hall, every single wolf bowed their head, parting like the sea. The karma was instant and brutal. Lord Godfrey was left standing in the dark corridor, stripped of his dignity, his royal favor, and his power, while the daughter he threw away was carried out like a goddess. But as the heavy oak doors of the keep slammed shut behind the royal entourage, Rowena remained in the shadows, her hands balled into fists, her perfectly manicured nails biting into her palms until they bled. She turned to Bastian, the head cook who was cowering in the corner. "Send a raven to the southern mercenaries," Rowena hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "King Caspian thinks she will even make it to the capital to take the trial. I will ensure she dies on the road." The royal carriage was a rolling fortress of iron and gilded oak, lined with the thickest, softest furs Isolde had ever felt. As the heavy wheels crushed the gravel of the Blackwood courtyard and rolled out past the iron gates, Isolde sat frozen on the velvet cushions. For the first time in 19 years, she was breathing air that didn't smell of mold, rat droppings, and damp earth. She inhaled deeply, her sensitive omega nose overwhelmed by the sheer, staggering beauty of the outside world. She could smell the crisp, freezing pine of the northern forests, the distant, loamy scent of a running river, and the sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine. But most overpowering of all was the scent of the man sitting across from her. Rainwater and wild jasmine. "Her alpha, you are shaking," Caspian said gently. Isolde jumped, pulling her knees to her chest. I apologize, Your Majesty. It is just cold." Caspian sighed, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in his chest. He moved across the carriage, ignoring the royal protocol that dictated a king must keep his distance. He sat beside her, wrapping a thick, heated bear pelt over her lap. "Do not call me Your Majesty, Isolde. My name is Caspian, and you never have to apologize for simply existing in my presence." Isolde reached out a trembling hand, her fingers grazing the rich fabric of his tunic. "Why did you do this? Why did you claim me? I am blind, my king. I cannot lead your armies. I cannot read your treaties. I am broken." Caspian caught her hand, his massive, calloused fingers wrapping around hers with an infinite, stunning gentleness. He brought her knuckles to his lips, kissing them softly. "You are not broken, little wolf," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "You survived 19 years in a dark pit with monsters. That does not make you weak. It makes you the strongest woman I have ever met. The moon goddess does not make mistakes. She gave you to me because I needed a queen with a heart, not just a sword." Tears, hot and fast, spilled from Isolde's sightless eyes. It was the first time in her life someone had spoken to her with reverence, treating her perceived disability not as a curse, but as a testament to her endurance. It was a profound, quiet justice that healed a fraction of her shattered soul. The journey south took 3 days. In that time, Caspian did not leave her side. He personally fed her roasted venison and sweet honeyed bread, coaxing her malnourished body back to health. He described the landscapes outside the window to her, painting pictures of snow-capped mountains and sprawling green valleys with his deep, soothing voice. Slowly, the terrified, flinching scullery maid began to fade, replaced by a quiet, incredibly perceptive Omega who listened to the world with unparalleled intensity. But the peace of their journey was an illusion. On the evening of the third day, as the royal convoy entered the dense, twisting shadows of the weeping woods, Isolde's ears twitched. While Caspian was pouring her a goblet of water, her heightened senses picked up something the Alpha King's guards had missed. It wasn't a scent. It was a sound. The faint, metallic scrape of a drawn bowstring hidden high in the canopy of the ancient oak trees. Then, the incredibly slow, controlled breathing of not one, but 20 individuals waiting in ambush. "Caspian," Isolde whispered, her voice tight with panic. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Stop the carriage." Caspian frowned, immediately on high alert. "What is it, my sweet?" "Above us, in the trees." Isolde's clouded eyes darted frantically, tracking sounds invisible to the naked eye. 20 men. Silver-tipped arrows. They are aiming for the lead horses. Before Caspian could even shout the command to his guards, the night erupted in violence. A rain of silver arrows tore through the canopy, striking the lead horses of the convoy. The beasts screamed, the carriage jerking violently as it careened off the dirt path and crashed into a thicket of thorns. The heavy wooden door of the carriage was ripped open. Caspian roared, his golden eyes flashing as his claws extended, immediately shifting into a lethal, defensive stance over Isolde. Outside, the king's royal guard clashed with masked mercenaries. The clash of steel and the guttural snarls of shifting wolves echoed through the dark woods. Rowena's assassins had arrived, and they had one specific target. A massive, scarred rogue wolf lunged through the shattered window of the carriage, his jaws snapping wildly at Isolde's throat. Caspian intercepted him, his massive hands wrapping around the rogue's throat and crushing it with a sickening snap. But as Caspian threw the body out, another mercenary, armed with a silver blade, slipped through the opposite door, stepping silently into the carriage while the king's back was turned. Isolde couldn't see the blade, but she heard the distinct, sharp hum of metal cutting through the air. She smelled the sour rot of the assassin's fear. Without thinking, without hesitating, the blind Omega moved. She threw her small body forward, not to cower, but to shove Caspian out of the trajectory of the descending silver blade. "Caspian! Behind you!" she screamed. The silver blade sliced through the thick velvet of the king's cloak, biting a shallow, burning line across Isolde's fragile shoulder. The metal hissed against her skin, a toxic reaction to her werewolf blood, and she let out a sharp cry of pain, collapsing onto the carriage floor. But her desperate shove had worked. The assassin's blade, meant for the back of King Caspian's neck, struck empty air. Time seemed to stop inside the cramped, shattered carriage. Caspian looked at the silver dagger embedded in the oak paneling, then down at the bleeding, blind Omega, who had just thrown her frail body into the path of a lethal strike to save him. The Alpha King did not just shift, he erupted. The sound that tore from Caspian's chest was not of this world. It was a primordial roar that shattered the remaining glass in the carriage windows. He lunged, his massive hands locking onto the assassin's armor. With a terrifying display of brute strength, Caspian ripped the man entirely out of the carriage, hurling him into the trunk of a massive oak tree with bone-crushing force. Outside, the king's elite guard, spurred by their alpha's blinding fury, decimated the remaining mercenaries in seconds. It was a massacre. The woods went deathly silent, save for the ragged breathing of the surviving guards and the dripping of rain from the canopy. Caspian fell to his knees beside Isolde. His hands, still coated in the blood of their attackers, hovered over her shaking form, terrified of hurting her further. "Isolde!" he choked out, his golden eyes wide with a fear he had never known on any battlefield. "My queen, look at me." Look at me." She couldn't see him, but she turned her face toward the sound of his voice, her cloudy eyes wide. "Are you hurt, my king? Did the silver touch you?" "You foolish, brave, beautiful creature," Caspian whispered, ripping a clean strip of linen from his own tunic to press firmly against her bleeding shoulder. The wound was shallow, but the silver poison was making her feverish. "You saved my life. My own elite guards, seasoned veterans of 100 wars, did not hear the ambush. How did you know?" Isolde leaned into his touch, the warmth of his hand soothing the biting sting of the silver. "When you live in the dark, Caspian, the world speaks to you differently. I heard the tension of the bowstrings. I smelled the sour sweat of their fear. I do not need my eyes to see the truth." A profound realization washed over the Alpha King. The noble courts pitied her. Her father despised her. But the moon goddess had not cursed Isolde. She had forged her into something entirely unique. Her blindness was not a weakness. It was an unparalleled mastery of her other senses. "Bind the surviving mercenaries," Caspian ordered his guards, his voice turning into cold, hard iron as he carried Isolde back into the secured carriage. "Do not let them die. I want names. I want the seal of the coward who paid them." 2 days later, the massive iron gates of the High Ridge Kingdom loomed before them. It was a sprawling, magnificent fortress, carved directly into the side of a jagged mountain, completely different from the damp, oppressive walls of Blackwood Keep. But their arrival was not met with unbridled joy. Word of the king's scandalous choice of a mate had flown faster than the royal carriages. Waiting in the grand courtyard were the elders of the High Council, a rigid, unforgiving group of traditionalists. Leading them was Lord Henry Cavendish, a strict, grey-haired alpha, whose bloodline had served as the king's advisors for 3 centuries, alongside his formidable strategist, Arthur Pendleton. These were real, powerful men who held the political stability of the kingdom in their hands. "Your Majesty," Lord Henry Cavendish spoke, his voice echoing off the stone courtyard. He bowed stiffly, his eyes darting to the frail, silver-haired girl leaning heavily against the king's side. "We rejoice at your safe return. However, the Fitzgerald Accords have been officially invoked by the Northern Lords. The alliance is in jeopardy. If this Omega is to wear the crown, she must face the trial of the ancestors at midnight." Arthur Pendleton stepped forward, unrolling a heavy parchment. "The labyrinth of the whispering catacombs, Your Majesty. She must enter alone, retrieve the moonstone chalice from the center, and return before sunrise. If she fails, she is exiled, and the mating is severed by law." Caspian snarled, his grip on Isolde tightening. "She was wounded in an ambush. She saved my life. Is that not proof enough of her worth?" "The law is the law, my king," Cavendish replied gravely. "Even you cannot overwrite the ancient pacts without inciting a civil war." Caspian was ready to burn the Accords and the Council with them, but a soft, cold hand rested on his chest. Isolde stepped forward, her milky eyes staring blankly ahead, yet her posture was suddenly straight, mirroring the regal defiance of the Alpha standing beside her. "I will do it," Isolde said softly, her melodic voice carrying an iron will that shocked the hardened generals. "I have lived my entire life in the dark, Lord Cavendish. Your catacombs do not frighten me." The Whispering Catacombs were a legendary nightmare, a sprawling subterranean purgatory carved deep beneath the jagged foundations of the High Ridge. For centuries, the labyrinth was designed with one singular, cruel purpose: to break the minds of the strongest alpha warriors. It was entirely devoid of light, a sensory void where the twisting, suffocating corridors, sudden vertical drop-offs, and complex mechanical traps were triggered by a single, miscalculated breath. At the exact stroke of midnight, the heavy, rune-carved stone doors ground open with a sound like a dying beast. King Caspian stood at the threshold, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked as though the bone might shatter under the pressure. The flickering torches of the courtyard cast long, dancing shadows over his battle-scarred face. He kissed Isolde's forehead, his scent of rainwater and wild jasmine washing over her in a protective, desperate wave. "I will be waiting right here," he promised, his voice thick with a terrifying vulnerability the kingdom had never heard from their ruthless conqueror. "Come back to me, little wolf." Isolde stepped into the pitch-black abyss, and the colossal stone doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her in absolute, suffocating silence. For an ordinary wolf, the darkness would be blinding, a terrifying plunge into the unknown. But for Isolde, the dark was not an enemy. It was her oldest companion. It was a return to her sanctuary. She closed her sightless eyes, taking a deep, calming breath of the stagnant, freezing air. The damp, earthy smell of the catacombs, thick with the scent of wet limestone and ancient dust, was nearly identical to the Blackwood cellars where she had spent 19 years of her life. She began to walk. She moved with the silent, ethereal grace of a phantom. She didn't need a torch. Fire would only blind her further by masking the subtle, life-saving shifts in the subterranean air currents. She let her calloused fingertips trail lightly against the freezing stone walls, reading the grooves and cracks like a map. 10 minutes into the labyrinth, her foot paused mere millimeters above the floor. She didn't see the pressure plate hidden beneath a thick layer of undisturbed dust, but she heard the hollow, distinct echo of the stone beneath her bare toes. She stepped over it effortlessly, when the main corridor suddenly split into 3 identical, yawning paths. She simply stopped and tilted her head, listening to the dark. The faint, metallic scent of ancient, rusted silver wafted from the left corridor, warning her of a lethal trap waiting to spring. From the right came the incredibly faint, sweet scent of stagnant water, a dead end leading to a drowned cavern. But straight ahead, she felt a microscopic draft of warm air, carrying the distinct, pulsating energy of old magic. She navigated the deadly maze with unparalleled precision. When she approached the legendary iron pendulum of St. Elred, she heard the massive blades swinging silently in the dark by the way they sliced the air currents, creating a faint, rhythmic whistle. She waited for the precise half-second of stillness between the swings and slipped through unscathed. The obstacles designed to disorient, exhaust, and terrify sighted warriors meant absolutely nothing to a girl who had memorized the layout of an entire fortress by the sound of mice scratching against the stones. Hours bled away. Outside in the grand courtyard, the High Council waited in tense, suffocating silence. King Caspian paced the cobblestones like a caged, starved beast, his eyes burning a vibrant, unnatural gold. Lord Henry Cavendish exchanged a deeply skeptical glance with Arthur Pendleton. "It has been 4 hours, Your Majesty," Cavendish murmured carefully. "No one has ever navigated the first ring of the maze this fast, let alone a frail, an unseeing Omega. We should prepare the extraction team before she starves or falls to the spike pits." "Speak another word of doubt against my mate," Caspian snarled, stopping dead in his tracks to glare at the elder, "and I will throw you into the catacombs myself." Deep within the absolute center of the labyrinth, Isolde found the pedestal. Sitting atop a pillar of black obsidian was the moonstone chalice. It radiated a soft, pulsing warmth that she could feel against her skin like sunlight. She reached out, her trembling hands wrapping around the ancient artifact, feeling the deeply carved runes beneath her thumbs. A profound, overwhelming sense of peace and validation washed over her shattered soul. The goddess had not abandoned her. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Just as the first pale streaks of dawn began to bleed over the jagged peaks of the high ridge mountains, the heavy stone doors of the catacombs began to grind open once more. The entire courtyard, packed with hundreds of elite guards and nobles, collectively held its breath. Out of the suffocating darkness emerged Isolde. She was covered in a thick layer of grey dust, the hem of her simple gown torn and muddy, her silver hair wild and tangled. But her chin was held high, and in her small, scarred hands she held the glowing moonstone chalice. She had not only survived, she had conquered the maze in record time, flawlessly. Caspian abandoned all royal protocol. He sprinted across the massive courtyard, dropping heavily to his knees on the hard cobblestones before her. He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, burying his face against her stomach, inhaling her scent to prove to his frantic inner beast that she was real and alive. A shockwave of awe rippled through the council. Lord Henry Cavendish, a man who had never bowed to anyone but the Alpha King himself, immediately dropped to one knee. Arthur Pendleton followed, bowing his head in profound, absolute reverence. The blind Omega from the cellars had passed the ultimate test. She was undeniably chosen by the goddess, her worth cemented in the ancient laws. "My queen," Lord Cavendish declared, his voice thick with a newfound, unshakable respect. "The High Ridge bows to you." But the story of Queen Isolde didn't end with her triumph in the dark. The scales of cosmic justice, heavily tipped by 19 years of profound cruelty and social inequity, were about to violently correct themselves. The surviving mercenary from the carriage ambush, a hardened killer named Captain Kalen, had been broken in the king's subterranean dungeons. He confessed everything to the royal inquisitors. He handed over a heavy leather pouch of gold coins, all stamped with the personal, unmistakable seal of Lady Rowena Blackwood, along with a written, signed order to slaughter the blind Omega and disguise it as a rogue attack. But when the confession was brought before the newly crowned queen, Isolde's sharp mind pieced together a far more devastating puzzle. "The coins," Isolde said softly, sitting upon the silver throne beside Caspian in the war room. "Captain Kalen, describe the gold you were paid with. Was it minted with the royal crest, or was it raw, heavy bullion?" The mercenary, trembling before the king, swallowed hard. "Raw bullion, your grace. Unstamped. Heavy bars cut into chunks." Isolde turned her sightless eyes toward her king. "Caspian, my father is not just an abuser. He is a traitor to the crown and a thief to the common people. For years I lived in the cellars beneath the grain silos. I heard the merchant carts arriving in the dead of night, led by a smuggler named Alistair Covington. My father has been hoarding the kingdom's unminted gold reserves behind the false walls of the root cellar, artificially inflating the price of gold and grain across the northern reaches. He starved the lower packs and the commoners to line his own hidden vaults. I know this, because I used to dust the heavy iron crates they were kept in. I know the exact dimensions of his treason." Caspian's eyes flared with a lethal, blinding fury. Attempting to murder his queen was a death sentence, but hoarding wealth to starve the vulnerable packs under his protection, that was an eradication of the Blackwood legacy. 2 weeks later, the earth of the northern reaches trembled as the royal army marched. Lord Godfrey stood on the high battlements of Blackwood Keep, adjusting his velvet robes, fully expecting a visit from a king returning to officially break an invalid, legally nullified mating. Instead, he looked over the valley and saw 5,000 heavily armored warriors bearing the black and silver banners of the Alpha King, entirely surrounding his fortress. When the heavy oak doors of the great hall were kicked open by the vanguard, King Caspian did not walk in alone. Beside him walked Queen Isolde. She was a vision of absolute, terrifying power. Draped in garments of spun gold and midnight velvet, her silver hair was intricately braided with diamonds. She moved with a regal, flawless grace, her hand resting lightly on the arm of her Alpha King. The frail, terrified scullery maid was gone, replaced by a sovereign of unparalleled dignity. Rowena, who had been sitting at the high table drinking expensive wine, dropped her golden goblet. The metal clattered loudly, spilling dark red wine across the stone floor like blood. Her face drained of all color, her jaw slack with horror as she stared at the sister she was absolutely certain was dead, now wearing the heavy crown of the most powerful kingdom in the realm. "Lord Godfrey!" Caspian's voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls and carrying the terrifying authority of a god of war. "You stand accused of high treason, the attempted assassination of a reigning monarch, and the gross, unforgivable economic sabotage of the northern Pax. Your hidden vaults have been breached. Your stolen gold has been seized. Your lands are forfeit, and your titles are permanently stripped." Godfrey's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the cold stone floor, sobbing hysterically and begging for mercy, spouting desperate, pathetic apologies to the daughter he had treated like garbage for 2 decades. Isolde stepped forward, leaving the safety of Caspian's arm. She stood over her father. She could not see the abject terror on his sweating face, but she could smell his absolute, pathetic ruin. She felt no anger. She felt no rage. She only felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of the scales balancing. "You kept me in the dark because you thought my blindness made me a monster," Isolde said softly, her melodic voice carrying effortlessly through the dead, silent hall. "You thought hiding your sins in the shadows would protect you. But the dark is where I learned to listen. And the cries of the Pax you starved, the weight of the gold you stole, and the blood you tried to spill, it all echoed down into the cellars. The only monsters in this keep were sitting right here at the high table." The justice enacted that day became a legend whispered across the continents. King Caspian did not execute them. A swift death by the sword was a mercy reserved for honorable enemies. Instead, true, poetic karma was served. Lord Godfrey and Lady Rowena were stripped of their wealth, their fine silk clothes, and their alpha status. By royal decree, they were banished to the very cellars they had condemned Isolde to. They were forced into the same rough, scratching burlap sacks. They were ordered to scrub the thick grease from the massive iron cauldrons, living out the rest of their miserable days in the cold, damp dark, experiencing the exact, unbroken torment they had inflicted. History would forever remember the reign of Queen Isolde, not for the wars fought, but for the profound social justice she brought to the High Ridge Kingdom. She became the realm's greatest asset, sitting beside King Caspian to mediate treaties, using her impossibly sharp senses to detect lies, hidden economic agendas, and the true intentions of visiting lords. No assassin could sneak past her. No deceptive diplomat could fool her. The blind Omega from the cellar transformed a harsh, militant kingdom into a beacon of prosperity. The Blackwood name faded into obscurity, a dark cautionary tale whispered to arrogant alphas about the brutal, inescapable reality of karma. As for King Caspian, the ruthless conqueror was forever tamed by a single, undeniable truth. True power does not reside in the sharpness of a sword, but in the unyielding, luminous spirit of the woman who holds your heart in the dark. History remembers the reign of Queen Isolde, not for the wars fought, but for the profound justice and compassion she brought to the High Ridge Kingdom. She became the kingdom's greatest asset, sitting beside King Caspian to mediate treaties, using her impossibly sharp senses to detect lies, hidden agendas, and the true intentions of visiting lords. No assassin could sneak past her. No deceptive diplomat could fool her. The blind Omega from the cellar transformed the harsh, militant kingdom into a beacon of prosperity and fairness. The Blackwood name faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered to arrogant alphas about the brutal, inescapable reality of karma. As for King Caspian, the ruthless conqueror was tamed by a single, undeniable truth. True power does not reside in the sharpness of a sword, but in the unyielding, luminous spirit of the woman who holds your heart in the dark.